So imagine opening your mail to find out your monthly rent is totally frozen, like just a huge sigh of relief.
Oh, absolutely. But then picture your landlord opening their mail on that exact same day, and they find out their insurance premiums and heating bills have just skyrocketed by double digits.
Yeah, it's a total collision. You're essentially watching two totally different, entirely valid economic realities just crashing into each other inside the exact same mailbox.
It really is. It's this brutal mathematical standoff where, well, any intervention to save one party risks fundamentally breaking the other one.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Right now, New York City is caught in this massive, high-stakes financial battle over the future of housing.
Right. And today we're unpacking the mechanics behind all of it.
Exactly. We're looking at a situation that directly impacts over 1 million rent-stabilized apartments and roughly, 2.4 million tenants?
Yeah, around 2.4 million. Just to put that into perspective for you, if the rent-stabilized population of New York City were its own city, it would literally be the fourth largest in the United States.
Wow, that is massive. So here's the news hook for you. In May 2026, Mayor Zohran Mamdani's newly appointed Rent Guidelines Board, which you'll hear us call the RGB, proposed a rent increase of just 0 to 2% for a one-year lease.
And 0 to 4% for a 2-year lease.
Right, and that proposal has set off an absolute firestorm across all 5 boroughs.
Oh, a total firestorm. I mean, on one side, you have tenant advocates pointing to these severe rent burdens, and they are demanding a total rent freeze.
But then on the flip side, you've got property owners flashing huge warning signs. They're arguing that a freeze will literally bankrupt smaller landlords and cause the city's aging housing stock to basically fall into physical ruin.
So our mission today is to cut through all that rhetoric. We just want to gather the facts.
Yep, just the facts. We are pulling data directly from the 2026 NYC Rent Guidelines Board's Income and Expense Study, their price index of operating costs, and recent on-the-ground news reports from The Independent and Realtor.com.
We are going to build the financial ledger for both sides of this crisis. We really want to look closely at the specific math driving both the tenants' fears and the landlord's warnings.
And hey, because this is a highly charged, deeply personal political issue for millions of people, we want to be exceptionally clear right up front. We are not taking sides.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing the views of the tenant advocates, and we're not endorsing the landlord groups either. Our goal is simply to impartially report the data, the economic argument.
Exactly how the math works for both sides of this standoff.
Exactly. So to truly understand the intense push for a 0% rent increase, we first need to look at the severe pressure that is currently crushing everyday renters.
Yeah, the macroeconomic pressure is intense. The statistics coming out of the RGB reports are just stark. I mean, more than half of all New York City renters are currently classified as rent-burdened.
Wait, let's make sure we're operating with the precise definition there. Being rent-burdened means you're spending at least 30% of your pre-tax income strictly on housing costs, right?
Yeah, exactly, 30%. And think about it. When you factor in federal, state, and local taxes, 30% of your gross income could easily represent nearly half of your actual take-home pay.
That is why half your paycheck just gone immediately.
Right. That's the mechanical reality of the burden. Now, pair that percentage with the hard dollar amounts. The median household income for a rent-stabilized tenant in New York City is only about $60,000 a year.
Wow, only $60K.
Yeah. So when you're dedicating that large of a slice of a $60,000 income just to keep a roof over your head, your margin for error basically vanishes.
I can imagine.
Leaves very little capital for groceries, childcare, medical emergencies, or, just saving for the future.
And the context of the last few years makes that tight margin even tighter. The source materials point out that under former Mayor Eric Adams, tenants faced 4 straight years of approved rent increases.
Yeah, 4 consecutive years.
Right. And when you stack those up year over year, they compound to roughly a 12% total increase on one-year leases.
Exactly. But we know from broader economic data that working-class wages simply did not grow fast enough to match a 12% jump in fixed housing costs.
Right, paychecks just stayed flat. If rent obligations keep compounding at 12% while paychecks aren't moving, aren't we essentially just building a financial pressure cooker for these tenants?
That is exactly what's happening. The compounding nature of those increases is what brings us to the demands we're seeing today. 10 advocacy groups, like the Met Council on Housing, are drawing a hard line in the sand.
They want 0%, right?
Absolutely zero increases on all leases.
Oh.
Their argument is really rooted in neighborhood stability. They warn that even marginal hikes, like just 1 or 2%, will be the breaking point that displaces working-class families from their longtime communities.
And displacement isn't just about, moving to a cheaper apartment down the street. In this market, it often means leaving the city entirely.
Which completely hollows out the workforce that actually keeps the city running. That economic and social reality is the primary reason Mayor Mamdani took aggressive action as soon as he entered office.
Right, he appointed some new members to the board.
He did. He appointed 6 new members to the 9-member Rent Guidelines Board, and the strategic goal of those appointments was clear to secure a voting majority that favors a rent freeze and provides immediate relief to that pressure cooker you just described.
So, mechanically speaking, how does a rent freeze actually execute in the real world? Like, we throw the term around, but what does it mean for the actual person signing the lease?
Well, if the RGB approves a freeze in their final June vote, it strictly locks the renewal rate for new leases starting in October 2026.
Okay.
So it means that when your lease is up and you renew for another year, your monthly payment stays exactly the same. But, and this is a big but, what it explicitly does not do is roll back any of the historical increases.
Got it. So if your rent went up by 3% last year, you are permanently locked in at that higher baseline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It simply halts the upward trajectory for the duration of that specific lease term. It doesn't undo the past.
When you lay it out like that, it's incredibly easy to see why tenants and advocates are fighting tooth and nail for a freeze. For a household functioning on a $60,000 income, avoiding another compounded percentage increase isn't just a political victory, it's basic economic survival.
Right, it's survival. We've established how inflation and stagnant wages are suffocating the tenants. But that exact same inflation does not magically stop at the tenant's front door.
Oh, definitely not.
It is also attacking the physical structure of the building itself. When we look at the numbers landlords are dealing with, we see a totally different, yet equally severe crisis.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the RGB's 2026 price index of operating costs, or the PIOC.
The PIOC, yeah.
Right, this is that exhaustive research report the board staff puts together every year to track the true cost of maintaining real estate in the city. The PIOC shows that the overall cost to run a building surged by 5.3% this past year alone.
And a 5.3% aggregate increase is substantial. But the individual line items driving that average are where the real alarm bells are ringing for property owners.
What are the biggest drivers?
Well, fuel costs for heating these buildings exploded by 11.0%. And then there's the insurance market, which has just become incredibly volatile. Building insurance spiked by 10.5% in a single year.
Oh, wait, I want to pause on that insurance number. A 10.5% jump is painful, but the sources note that this comes immediately after an 18.7% jump the previous year.
Yeah, it's staggering.
If my math is right, compounding an almost 19% increase with the 10.5% increase means insurance costs have ballooned by nearly a third in just 24 months. How does a property owner even begin to budget for that kind of cost curve?
The reality is they often can't, which is why the system is fracturing right now. And you have to remember, those are just the volatile operational costs. You also have the massive fixed anchor of property taxes.
Right, taxes. How much of the pie is that?
Taxes make up nearly 28% of a building's total operating expenses in New York City. And this year, those taxes grew by 2.6%.
Wow.
So when nearly a third of your budget is mandated by the city, and that mandate keeps growing alongside double-digit spikes in fuel and insurance, the math becomes extremely rigid.
Landlord advocacy groups, specifically the Small Property Owners of New York, or SPONY, are pointing directly at these escalating costs to sound the alarm. They highlighted a fascinating macroeconomic comparison in the sources.
What do they point out?
They note that since 2016, overall inflation measured by the Consumer Price Index has risen over 32%. But the allowed rent increases dictated by the RGB during that exact same decade only grew by about 15%.
It's a massive gap.
Huge. Because of this massive delta between real-world inflation and capped revenue, SPONY argues landlords need a minimum 4.5% increase on one-year leases just to tread water, just to break even.
Right. They are outlining a structural deficit. The underlying argument is that the cost of simply keeping the lights on, the heat running, and the building legally compliant has vastly outpaced the revenue they are legally permitted to collect.
Okay, but I have to stop you there and push back a little because I'm looking right at the RGB's income and expense report from our sources. It clearly states that net operating income, or NOI, actually increased by 6.2% citywide this year.
Yes, that is in the report.
That is the third consecutive year of income growth. If landlord income is up over 6%, tenant advocates would absolutely argue that landlords should be comfortably in the black. Why are they panicking over a new boiler if they're demonstrably bringing in more operating cash?
That is a very fair challenge, and honestly, it's precisely the data point that causes the most friction in this debate. It really comes down to what net operating income actually measures, and more importantly, what it completely ignores.
What does it ignore?
Well, NOI is strictly the rent collected minus the day-to-day operating expenses we just discussed, like fuel, basic maintenance, and taxes. But NOI does not account for major things like capital expenditures, often called CapEx, and it completely ignores debt service.
Wait, really? So the NOI metric is essentially an incomplete ledger?
Highly incomplete. It's like calculating your household budget by only subtracting your groceries and electricity bill from your paycheck, but completely ignoring your mortgage payment and the fact that you need to replace your car's transmission.
Oh, wow. That changes things.
Right. The 6.2% NOI increase looks great until you realize the landlord still has to pay the bank. Kenny Burgos from the New York Apartment Association framed this dynamic perfectly in the source materials.
What did he say?
He noted that rent isn't going into the pockets of rent-stabilized owners to fund lavish lifestyles. It's going entirely into keeping the physical buildings standing.
But surely a 6.2% bump gives them some breathing room, right? If they've had 3 years of NOI growth, shouldn't a responsible business owner have been saving those profits to build capital reserves for things like roof repairs or debt refinancing?
You would think so in a standard free market scenario.
Yeah.
But remember that 32% inflation versus 15% revenue growth gap since 2016 we talked about.
Right, the deficit from the last decade.
Exactly. For many of these property owners, any minor bump in NOI today is instantly vaporized, just trying to fill the massive financial crater left by the previous decade. When commercial mortgage interest rates double, or a local law requires a $100,000 elevator modernization, a 6% bump in basic operating cash doesn't even cover the interest on the loan they have to take out to do the repair.
That makes sense. Which brings us to perhaps the most crucial distinction in our data today. If we are looking at this crisis accurately, we cannot view New York City real estate as one massive homogeneous block.
No, absolutely not.
The sources make it really clear that citywide averages like that 6.2% NOI growth are actually masking a localized disaster. Our sources refer to this as a tale of two cities, divided strictly by the age of the architecture.
To understand the systemic risk, you really have to split the city's rent-stabilized inventory into two distinct categories. You have properties built before 1974 and properties built after 1973.
The age is that important.
Yes. The age of the building completely dictates its financial health and its ability to withstand these inflationary shocks.
So let's look at the net operating income again, but through the lens of that 1974 divide. The sources show that older buildings, those built before 1974, generate an average monthly NOI of just $512 per unit.
Right.
But the newer buildings, built after 1973, are generating $1,454 per unit in NOI.
That is nearly a 3-to-1 difference in operating income simply based on the era the foundation was poured.
Why is the gap so massive?
The reasons are multifaceted. Older buildings naturally require significantly more physical upkeep. Their plumbing is aging, their electrical systems are strained by modern appliances, and their masonry needs constant repointing.
That adds up fast.
It does. Furthermore, these older buildings have been subjected to compound rent regulations for decades longer than newer construction, which suppresses their revenue baseline far below market realities.
And because of that incredibly thin $512 margin, the data reveals that 9.2% of all rent-stabilized properties in the city are now officially considered financially distressed.
And the vast majority of these distressed underwater buildings are those pre-1974 structures.
Right. Adding to that, the structural composition of the rent roll makes a massive difference here. The data points out that buildings that are 100% rent stabilized are the ones struggling the most.
Absolutely.
And these fully stabilized buildings make up a staggering 61% of the properties located outside of core Manhattan, meaning the outer boroughs where working-class families actually live.
Yeah, the outer boroughs get hit the hardest.
I want to explore the mechanics of why a 100% stabilized building is so uniquely vulnerable compared to a newer development.
It really comes down to cross-subsidization. A newer building constructed in the last couple of decades might operate on an 80-20 split.
Meaning 80% market rate, 20% affordable?
Exactly. So 80% of the apartments are leased at luxury market rate prices, and 20% are set aside as rent-stabilized affordable units. If fuel or insurance costs spike, the corporate owner of that new building can simply raise the rent on the 80% market rate units to absorb the financial blow.
Ah, so the high-income luxury units effectively subsidize the affordable units.
Precisely.
But a mom-and-pop landlord who owns a 100-year-old, six-story brick walk-up in the Bronx that is 100% rent stabilized doesn't have that luxury.
None at all.
They have absolutely zero market rate apartments to offset the inflation. Every single unit in their building is subject to the RGB's cap.
Exactly. They have no financial safety net and no mechanism to adapt to real-time economic changes.
You know, it sounds a lot like holding a fixed-rate bond in a high-inflation environment.
That's a great comparison.
Like, if you hold a bond paying a fixed 2% yield, but real-world inflation suddenly jumps to 8%, your investment isn't just stagnant. It is actively losing purchasing power every single day.
Right.
The city has essentially turned these 100% stabilized pre-1974 buildings into fixed yield bonds, but expects the owners to pay variable, hyperinflated maintenance costs. That just doesn't make sense.
It's an excellent way to conceptualize the financial trap these smaller owners are in. And it is exactly why groups like the Small Property Owners of New York are proposing a radical shift in how the city governs rent. They're advocating for what they call a split rent order.
Yeah, I read through SEPUNY's proposal for the split rent order, and it fundamentally alters the landscape. They're asking the city to recognize that a mom-and-pop operator in Queens faces entirely different existential threats than a multinational real estate investment trust operating in Midtown Manhattan.
The mechanics of the split rent order would essentially create a dual-track system. It would allow smaller owners of those older, vulnerable pre-1974 buildings to receive a higher, different rent adjustment than the corporate owners of the newer, cash flow positive buildings.
So it's like targeted relief.
Exactly. It's a targeted relief mechanism designed to triage the buildings that are actively bleeding out, without unnecessarily raising rents on tenants living in highly profitable luxury developments.
Because landlords are warning that without this kind of targeted mathematical relief, they are going to be forced into widespread deferred maintenance.
And deferred maintenance is the real danger here.
Right. And I think we need to be clear about what deferred maintenance actually looks like in practice for you, the listener. It's not just a landlord deciding to wait an extra year to paint the hallways.
No, not at all. Deferred maintenance is the slow, cascading failure of building systems. It means when the 50-year-old boiler starts failing in January, the landlord patches it with temporary fixes instead of replacing it, which leads to chronic heat outages.
That's miserable for the tenants.
It is. It means when a minor roof leak develops, it is ignored until it compromises the drywall and creates a mold crisis in the top floor apartments. The landlords argue that by starving these older buildings of essential capital, the city is inadvertently condemning tenants to live in rapidly deteriorating, unsafe conditions.
It is a vicious cycle. The city suppresses the rent to protect the tenant's wallet, but by doing so, they choke off the capital required to keep the tenant's ceiling from caving in.
It's a brutal reality.
And when you look at the skyrocketing insurance premiums we talked about earlier, a lot of that isn't just corporate greed from insurers. Insurers look at these older buildings, they see the deferred maintenance, they see the aging electrical grids, and they price that massive risk right into the premium.
Exactly. The older the building gets without a capital injection, the higher the insurance goes, which further depletes the capital.
It's a systemic downward spiral. And as we mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive, our role is not to declare a victor in this debate. It's simply to illuminate the ledgers on both sides.
Right. You have an absolute undeniable necessity for affordable housing colliding head-on with the unforgiving, compounding mathematical reality of maintaining physical architecture in an inflationary environment.
So as we look toward the RGB's final binding vote this June, we are watching a truly brutal equation play out in real time.
We really are.
We have working-class tenants who mathematically cannot afford to absorb higher housing costs without sacrificing basic necessities. And simultaneously, we have owners of aging pre-1974 properties who mathematically cannot absorb double-digit spikes in operating expenses without plunging their buildings into distress.
The board's final decision is going to have to navigate this incredibly narrow tightrope. And frankly, whatever percentages they finalize will have immediate, sweeping consequences for the entire economic ecosystem of New York City.
As you watch this political and financial debate unfold over the coming weeks, we want to leave you with one final, broader macroeconomic question to ponder. We started this deep dive by imagining two mailboxes, one holding a rent freeze, the other holding exploding operational bills. If a rent freeze is enacted and it ultimately forces these smaller mom-and-pop landlords into bankruptcy because they physically cannot pay their tax and insurance bills, who ends up buying those distressed pre-1974 buildings at the foreclosure auctions?
That is the million-dollar question.
Does a rent freeze designed to protect communities inadvertently trigger a wave of corporate consolidation, transferring neighborhood properties from local owners to massive private equity firms? And if so, what does that mean for the long-term future and fabric of your city's neighborhoods?